Hello viewers, my name is Luyanda Tetwa from Ebenezer Majombozi High School. Welcome to the ECDoE broadcast studio. Today's lesson is about analyzing a poem, Hard to Find by Sinesipo Jojo. I will be covering this topic for your full understanding. Why poetry? Why do we read poetry? Why do we do poetry? Poetry is able to explore a different range of topics, such as personal emotions, personal experiences, as well as themes about society, nature, and human needs. Why do we have poets? People write sometimes in order for them to be able to reflect on their emotions, for them to be able to explore some of their human needs, and for us to read and relate to what the poet says is an indication that these poems help us to better understand what some people go through, and some of those things that we read about in these poems are things that we ourselves can also relate to. Sometimes when you experience something or certain emotions, you might find it hard for you to explain exactly what you are feeling. Now, poetry helps us to be able to understand those personal emotions, those feelings that one feels and that one chooses to write down in order for other people to be able to know and understand how they are truly feeling. The objective for these lessons, we will be going through reading the poem, giving a summary, and also looking at the vocabulary, which are the choice of words that the poet chooses to use, and explaining these words in the context of our poem. We will also be analyzing the poem line by line, also looking at the figures of speech that the speaker uses and the themes that the speaker uses to explore the message being conveyed within the poem. Now, in front of us, we have two cartoons. The first cartoon is a cartoon of a guy with both his hands on his head. The writing on this cartoon is keywords with exclamation mark. There are keywords everywhere. Now, one thing I also want us to take note about this cartoon is the font as well of the words that are in the cartoon. Keywords is written in bold, in capital letters, as well as the use of the exclamation marks. Next to this cartoon, we also have a cartoon, or a picture rather, that is taken from a Toy Story movie, where the words in this cartoon says words. Words are everywhere. Now, we all know what words are. Words can be written, words can be spoken, words can be heard. Now, when we get into the poem, I would like us to take these pictures, both these cartoons, keep them in our minds, and that will help us to be able to understand better the message that is being conveyed in this poem. In this poem, Hard to Find by Sinesipo Jojo, this poem will be exploring the struggle to find the right words to be able to express deep emotions, especially when those emotions are involving the feelings of the heart. The poem will also be able to highlight the contrast between the abundance of words in our daily lives, as well as the scarcity of words when they are needed to convey heartfelt feelings. The poem will also convey towards the end of the poem the sense of longing and the sense of hope that words will eventually align with what the heart wants to say. Now, when we look at the poem Hard to Find, I want us for a second to interact with the title of the poem. Hard to find. When something is hard to find, it's difficult for you to navigate. But as we tap into the poem, we will find out what is this exact thing that the poet is finding very hard to navigate. As the poem tells us about how the poet struggles to find the right words to express their deep emotions. You know, sometimes when you experience emotions, be it emotions of happiness, be it emotions of depression, be it emotions of being sad, sometimes you might struggle to find the right words to actually express the deep feeling of how your heart feels. Let's get into the poem Hard to Find by Sinesipho Jojo. Words are everywhere, daily. We read them and they fly out like nobody's business when they are provoked. But there's always something hard to understand. They are hard to find when they are needed by the heart. When the heart feels, words hide like they are not part of our lives. While words are busy playing some twisted game, my heart looks sadly through the glass windows as the raindrops slowly slide down gently on the cloudy lifetime, hoping that one day words will realize what my heart wants to say. Looking at also the vocabulary that the writer or the speaker chooses to use. Now, when a poet writes, they do not just use any words, but they choose particular words or certain words that will help them to be able to express what actually they are feeling. The use of everywhere in the first line, which in this case, in the context of the poem, is an indication of the abundance of words that are all around us. The use of fly out, which shows or indicates how words come easily out of our mouth without even having to think about them. The use of provoked, which is when somebody is triggered or when a person experiences a prompt of a feeling to be able to utter words. The use of twisted, which is misleading in the poem. And then slide, which is an indication of how words move out smoothly out of our mouth. And then realize how one becomes aware of a certain situation. When you look at the poem, line 1 and line 2, words are everywhere, daily. Now, we spoke about the diction or the choice of words or the use of words. The word everywhere, the speaker highlights the abundance of words, how words are in abundance and present everywhere in our daily lives. Now, also the word daily in line 2, which is a single word. The word daily is there to put emphasis on the abundance of these words that we come across in our daily lives. Moving on to line 3 and line 4. We read them and they fly out like nobody's business when we are provoked. You know, when sometimes you're feeling certain emotions, or if sometimes your emotions are triggered by something or someone, you tend to speak out or utter words without even thinking about them. In this poem, the speaker emphasizes the fact that when we are triggered or emotional, words can come out easily, perhaps sometimes not without even thinking too much of them. Like nobody's business. This line also implies that words cannot be controlled. They fly out of our mouth quickly. The word control meaning that it's something that one cannot take control of, something that you cannot stop, something that meaning that words are not forced out of your mouth, but they come out uncontrollably. Now, looking at the last line 4, the poet or the speaker uses the use of ellipses, which are the 3 dots at the end of line 4. The reason as to why that punctuation is used by the poet, it is to stress out the frustration or to show us or to indicate the frustration of the poet when the words cannot come out of the poet's mouth. Moving on to line 2, stanza 2. Line 5 says, but there's always something hard to understand. Now, when the poet starts in this line, they make use of the word but. This line is there to also indicate that sometimes there is always something complex or difficult for the poet to comprehend. So by not understanding, it shows the dilemma that the poet is currently facing. The poet also makes use of an irony. Now, what is an irony? An irony implies the opposite of what is being expected. When the poet uses the word but, it's an indication of a contradiction. How at the beginning of the poem, in the first line to the fourth line, the speaker speaks about how words can come out easily, how words are everywhere, how words are around us. But yet, in line 5, the poet is finding it hard to find the right words. Moving on to lines 6 and 7. They are hard to find when they are needed by the heart. Words can become elusive when you want to express the heart matters. The poet is struggling to find the right words to express herself. The poet also makes use of the word needed. Not only does the poet use want, but uses the word needed in order to indicate something that is essential, something that the speaker needs in order for her to be able to express herself. Now, when we talk about words being elusive, when you want to express the matters of the heart, it is when somebody feels deep emotions and want to explain how exactly they feel, but struggle to put it in words. I'm sure we've once heard a saying of how a person would say, I can't express myself, I am running out of words. Because that person can't find the perfect words to initially explain what they are deeply feeling. Moving on to line 8 and line 9, when the heart feels, words hide like they are not part of life. In these two lines, the poet shows that when emotions are strong, words seem to disappear. Words seem to become inaccessible. The poet feels that words cannot properly explain her life. The poet goes to the extent of makes use of a figure of speech, which is personification. When he says words hide like they are not part of life. In this case, words are being compared to people who hide, not wanting to be found. The word hide also puts emphasis on that when the speaker tries to find the perfect word, it's as if words are playing hide to seek. He cannot find the correct words or the perfect word to express what her heart really feels. In line 10 and 14, the speaker says, while words are busy playing a twisted game, my heart looks sadly through the glass window as the raindrops slowly slide down gently on the cloud lifetime. Now in line 10, when the speaker says, while words are busy playing a twisted game, words seems to be behaving in a way that is unpredictable or uncooperative. It makes use of personification where words are being compared to a person who is playing an unfair game. And this game makes the heart to be miserable or sad. Now we can all imagine how one would feel if you are trying to express yourself to your loved one, express yourself to a person, how you feel about a certain situation, and not being able to find the perfect words. My heart looks sadly through the glass window. The raindrops is a representation of the speaker's tears. The poet is deeply hurt by her inability to be able to find the perfect words to express how she feels. The poet also uses in line 13, as the raindrop slowly slides down gently on the cloudy lifetime. That phrase, cloudy lifetime, also suggests that speaker's emotions are indicating something darkened or gloomy. This also then creates a sad mood. Now, when the speaker gets to the last line, which is line 15, the speaker says, hoping that one day words will realize what the heart wants to say. Now, after the speaker has come to a realization that words are everywhere, but at some point encounters the fact or struggles to find the perfect words to write, as he closes or ends the poem, the speaker ends the poem with hope and faith that one day, eventually, words will be able to align with what the speaker's heart desires and will be able to express her true feelings. And also, the last line also brings a bit of hope and optimism that words will become aware and understand what the speaker wants to say. Now, the most important thing that we should also pay attention to when analyzing the poem is the themes. The themes are there to give us a better understanding of the message being conveyed in the poem. Some of the themes that are found in this poem, Hard to Find, is the theme of abundance of words, which is the theme we see at the beginning of the poem, where the speaker speaks about words being everywhere. The theme of disappointed, when the speaker struggles to find the perfect words to express what her heart deeply feels. Also, the theme of hope and patience, which is the theme that we see in the last line, line 15, where the speaker now finally gets a bit of hope and faith that maybe one day, with patience, the heart will be able to understand what the heart, the words will be able to understand what the heart wants. And then lastly, some of the things that we also ought to bear in mind and make sure that we pay attention to is that when reading a poem, because it entails personal emotions, it explores different themes and ideas and reflections of how people or poets feel. It is very important for us to read with a greater understanding, for us to get a very clear picture or a bigger picture that the poet is trying to convey. It's also important that we know the context that the poem was written in, as well as also looking at the ideas and also the images and the major themes that the poet uses for them to be able to express themselves. Now, we spoke about diction as well as the choice of words. Diction and the choice of words also helps the poets to be able to draw a picture using the words for us readers to be able to understand exactly what the poet is trying to convey. Also, when answering your questions, it is very important that you read through the questions carefully with an understanding, not just reading the questions to answer, but read the question with understanding so that you will be able to answer your questions appropriately. And for you to be able to do that, it goes back to the first point, which is reading the poem with understanding. Now, I will be doing a quick recap on the poem as a whole. Now, there are certain things that also I do not mention in the analysis of the poem, but there are some figures of speech that I did touch base on. But as you read the poem, there are also other figures of speech that you'll be able to identify that the poet makes use of. There's another thing that also I want you to bear in mind when analyzing a poem. Sometimes they'll ask you questions based on the tone and the mood of the speaker. Perhaps they'll phrase the question by asking, what tone would the speaker use in this line? And also, how is this tone relevant in the poem? Now, when you look at the tone and the mood, this is what I always say. The tone and the mood, they work together. They cannot be separated. For an example, if you're feeling a certain way, be it upset, be it angry. Now, when you're upset and you're answering a question or you're uttering words, the tone that you will be using will be in alignment with how you are feeling at that time. Now, when we read the poem, we find there when the poet or the speaker rather experience frustration, where the speaker is now frustrated by the struggle of trying to find the right words in order for her to be able to express how she feels. And towards the end of the poem, where now the speaker's frustration changes from being frustrated to being hopeful, hoping that one day the speaker will be able to find the right words, or eventually the words will be able to align with what the heart truly desires. Now, other things that are also important for us to bear in mind when analyzing the poem. They will sometimes ask you questions based on the suitability of the title. Now, one thing that you might make a mistake of doing is that just explaining the title of the poem, whereas in this question, what you needed to do is to look at the title, look at the poem, and see how the title and the poem are suitable. Now, the title of the poem was Hard to Find. Now, the title on its own does not tell us specifically what is hard to find. But up until you get into the poem and read the poem, then you realize what the speaker was trying to say in the poem was that what's this one thing that was really hard to find is that the poet was struggling to find the right words to be able to express themselves, express what the heart really wants to say. Now, these things are very important for us to bear in mind. Now, as I said before that, when you analyze a poem, you need to read it in understanding so that you are able to actually understand or interpret the emotions that the poet is feeling at that particular time. Now, there are other things that one can also bear in mind when looking at the figures of speech in the poem. When you identify the figure of speech, just don't identify, but know how that figure of speech is used in the poem and why specifically the poet chose to use a personification instead of a metaphor. How is that figure of speech relevant? How does it help the poet to be able to convey the message, or rather put emphasis on what the speaker is trying to convey to readers? These things are very important for us to bear in mind, because when one approaches poetry, they think it's a hard thing because it's a person's emotions, it's a person's experience. But one thing you should know is that everything that is written by the speaker of the poet, it's there for us to be able to read and understand. And sometimes it might happen that some of these poems that we read, like Hard to Find, are things that we actually experience, things that we go through, things that when we read we can relate to, because it's something that we also feel like it's not only the speaker's experience, but it's something that we ourselves has also experienced in our lives. We have come to the end of our lesson. You can leave your questions and comments. Don't forget to leave the name of your school so we can give shout outs. Please share and also recommend and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. See you on our next lesson. Thank you.